The airless gun, this one's an XTR-7. So an airless gun, there's two aspects to an airless gun. One is, yes, it's a spray gun, but the difference between this and a conventional gun primarily is a conventional gun, you'll pull the trigger on, one stage, pull the trigger further, second stage. So on a conventional gun, first pull, primary stage air, second pull, secondary stage paint. With this gun, pull the trigger on, bang, it's paint. So the mistake a lot of people make is they treat this like a conventional gun and they'll squeeze the trigger on. It's the worst thing you can do, because what's happening is you've got immense pressure coming up here, depending on the size of the pump, anything up to 7,600 psi. When you start squeezing that trigger on, as the fluids release past the ball and seat, it cuts a track in the ball and seat very quickly. So with airless guns, it's either on or it's off. It's on or it's off. Now there's nothing wrong when you're spraying to pull the trigger, let it go. Pull the trigger, let it go. But make sure it's a clean actuation, straight through and deep. There's two little dogs or pins in the handle, and what they're actually doing is going back to a flat disc. The flat disc behind that has a spring, backing washer, end cap. But up this end is the needle and seat. So that flat disc is pulling that needle aft when you pull the trigger. So it's pulling it backwards. So if I need to change that needle and seat because it's worn, well, how do I know it's worn? Let's say, for example, you let the trigger go and it continues to exit paint from the seat. Well, basically that's telling me that there's something wrong with the needle. It could be a piece of rubbish. Well, I need to pull it apart. Well, let's do this for starters. Let's have a look inside the handle and see if there's any debris of any consequence up around the filter. So remember, with these guns, they have a little pin on the top of the handle. That pin is a locator that goes in the handle head, or the head of the gun. If you undo this and turn that, you can shear that pin off. So make sure you drop the pin down, out of the way, and pull the handle out. So we've pulled that out. Let's have a look at the filter. So the filter itself is quite clear and clean. Now, if there was a lot of debris, it'd be caked in paint. You'd have a job to get that out of there, and there would be holes about that size in the filter mesh to indicate that there was too many contaminants, debris in the paint when I was trying to spray it. So if you come to that arrangement, when you find that there's holes in this filter, you need to evacuate the paint from the pump, strain it through a form of filter mesh, and utilise the paint again. So you can't continue just say, oh, it's all right, I keep changing these, because it has a detrimental effect to the hydraulic reaction within the pump itself. So if it's a lot of debris, a lot of contamination, take it out of the pump, evacuate the pump, filter the paint, run it back through again. So remember, this filter it's a one-way filter, so it can't go in this way. That has to go in that way, like so, and then the handle reinstated. Now for this exercise, we need the handle in there, and you'll soon work out why. So I've started the thread, slide the handle down in the pin location, and then start to do it up. So you can use the handle still, like so, slide it back down onto the slot, and away we go. Do the handle up, hang on to the top of the handle so the pin stays in the locator. Now there's no need to over tighten it, slide the handle back round. That's what I like about these handles. They have a self-fitting spanner on there. Nip it up, put it back in the locator on the top, handles back on. You cannot use these guns without a handle. It is actually against the law. Again, there's the safety for the gun, for the trigger. So the dowel forward, I can depress the trigger, turn it backwards. The shoulder comes in the back of the gun housing. I cannot depress the trigger. However, if I find that I've cleaned this out, gone back to painting, and the paint, when I let the trigger go, still exits from the end of this, that means that you need a gun repair kit or a needle and seat in there. So the important thing is that if I'm going to remove this nut, honestly, I shouldn't really use this. Because what can happen is, if the shifter's jaws have slop in them, you can actually slide them onto that particular seat nut. When you go to undo it, it'll strip the shoulder around the thread and you won't get it undone, around the cap I should say, around the nut itself. So what I suggest you use is to use the correct spanner. So in this case it's 5/8. So I suggest you use a socket or a ring open ender. So to check that I've got the right one, put the open ender on there, see how much clearance there is in the cutout of the spanner. It's all good. So then I use a ring spanner. Now, it'll be reasonably tight, but just in case there's a piece of rubbish behind the needle and in the seat and letting the paint exhaust because it's holding the needle off the seat, with these particular guns, they're high pressure guns. So what you need to do is depress the trigger before you turn that nut. Because if I turn that nut and that needle is still in that seat, 1/4 turn, that's the end of that needle. 1/4 turn, that's the end of that needle. Because what we've got here is a tungsten carbide seat and a 316 stainless steel ball that's what we call the needle. So the ball is on a stem and the stem goes all the way through here. So it's important that I actually secure this appropriately so I don't damage my handle. Just put the gun in the vise, make sure it's secure, ring spanner, and put yourself in a position where you can just crack it and away you go. Now, what did I just tell you about this? If I turn that 1/4 turn, I've compromised the needle and seat. So what you need to remember is, before you undo this, depress the trigger, then undo it. So what the consequence of that is if you turn this nut and that needle or 316 ball bearing is in this seat, it won't hurt the seat, but what it will hurt is this ball bearing here. So that ball bearing, you can only see half the ball bearing because it's half the circumference what's sitting in the seat. It actually cuts a tiny little track in the edge of the ball bearing. So what can happen is, when you reassemble it, you push the trigger in, do the nut back up, or the seat, go to use it and you think, well, hang on, it's leaking, it's brand new. But let's just go back to the leaking. Sometimes you'll take that cap off and there'll be a little bit of debris on the carbide seat. And it's enough to stop the needle from coming all the way home. So if you clean that out, wash it out, blow it out, and then have a look at the needle itself and check it for any grooves or marks. Now if you find a groove or mark in there, 9 times out of 10 it's compromised and it won't seat properly anyway. And if it's got a groove in it, you might be able to use it for half a day, but remember the consequence. You've got a high velocity pump pushing a lot of pressure through, and if you can't make it seat when you want it to, when you let the trigger go, you could end up with a mess on the job, or worse, hurt somebody. So what I need to do now is get that needle out of there. So if I want to replace that needle, I need to go back to this gun. Now I can turn anything I want to and not concern myself with compromising the needle. So back to the vise. I've just said the front one, make sure you use the appropriate spanner. The back one won't be anywhere near as tight, and you'd be lucky to find a spanner this size on site as ring open ender. If you wish, I'd be inclined to probably order a ring spanner to undo this. Now, remember what I said, righty tighty, lefty loosey. So we undo it like so, and you'll find it's not over tight, and you can undo it relatively easy. Now, it's under spring pressure, so it's got a spring pushing back on it. So all I'm going to do is keep one hand there to catch that spring as it comes out.